So I think this is the most I've ever dicked around on a motorcycle issue without ever actually accomplishing anything. So I got the engine pulled out of my bike, and I pulled it out because I thought I had an issue with the engine at Daytona. It turned out I don't think it actually was, but the fear was that I actually burnt a valve seat. I don't think I burnt a valve exhaust seat. In fact, there's no evidence of that. It was likely a regulator rectifier issue or potentially something in the fuel system, but I wasn't able to find the smoking gun. Anyway, I have my engine starting to take it apart. This is a 1999 engine that I bought for $100. It was kind of a mystery engine. The only thing that I can see that wasn't stock on this thing is that it didn't have base gaskets on the bottom of the cylinder. It was just RTV. So you've got what, 10 thousandths of additional compression by that. I also have a 2001 engine. This is the one that I ran in 2023 for both racing and track day stuff. I stopped using this because it couldn't shift, so I'll be taking this apart and replacing the transmission soon. Where this leads me is that I have been looking at the cylinders on my 1999 engine that I ran last year, and I mean, the bike ran fine. I always knew I was going to be lower on power being on a Gen 1 versus Gen 2s, and then obviously all the newer bikes are just going to crush it anyway. But looking at this, I have some real worn cylinders. They're both worn and warped. The cylinders on the 2001 engine are in much better condition. So that bike had like 35,000 miles, and then I raced it and did track days for a couple years on it. So they're not perfect by any means, but they're not nearly as worn, especially in the upper half of the cylinder, but the bottoms are warped as well. So what that leads me to is I want to stay 650 cc's and remain ultra lightweight superbike legal, which has a 650 cc limit. So that means I cannot bore the cylinders out anymore. I can't even do the 0.5 millimeter bore. Yeah, it's a 0.5 millimeter. I think Suzuki actually sells pistons for that because it'll put me at like 653 cc's. So that's the easy route gone, is just reboring it. I want to stay 650 cc legal because I believe that's going to be the most competitive class that I can run. So what else could I do with these things? And is it a huge issue if the cylinders are out a bit? Well, these ones are so far out that I don't think it's a good idea to just, I'm this far in, I don't think just button the thing back up. I bought a ball hone, and I was just going to buy new rings, and then I learned I probably shouldn't be doing my own honing. So I'm going to try to get into contact with the shop on what to actually do about this. But I wanted to have some legitimate and reasonable measurements and understanding of what I'm actually going to be bringing them, so I don't sound like an idiot and I actually understand what's going on. And that's part of the reason why I want to do this as well, because it's interesting to me and I want to learn about this. So I bought a Mitutoyo micrometer, outside micrometer, 3 to 4 inch. I originally bought a Chinese one that was, I learned really quickly I can't skimp on that one. I need to have a precise measurement to at least get me in the ballpark of where the bore is supposed to be. And so this wasn't cheap, but I bought it because I thought it could get me in the range. I bought a bore dial gauge indicator, and I didn't go for the like $350 one that's going to be able to do 10 thousandths. If I wanted to get legitimate perfect measurements and I was the one that was actually going to be doing the machining and stuff, I would spring for that. However, with the one that's capable of getting thousandths as opposed to 10 thousandths, I can at least get an idea of what the shapes of the cylinders look like. So I've measured these things like 100 times, and these are, what I found is they're worn all over the place on the 99 engine that I ran last year. I only just noticed this. This is actually written on there, 3.1895 on the top. I can't make out any of the other writing that used to be on those things. So the cylinders themselves are 81 millimeter spec, so 3.1890 inches. And then the tolerance level on the cylinders is 3.1896. So I took measurements on both the thrust direction and the non-thrust direction on all of these. And what I'm finding is that, well, actually on the good cylinders, is that the top half of these cylinders is actually pretty good. So if I look at my fronts, what I was finding is like this one's 2 10 thousandths right on, and then by my reading it's 2 10 thousandths low on the bottom. So I can't be confident in the absolute measurement, the absolute numbers, but I can get an idea of what the cylinder looks like. And then what I'm finding on the bottom of all of these is that there's a big difference on the bottom part where this skirt is, and there's an area, and maybe you can see it, there's an area that's not swept by the piston rings, and it's like right there. So this thing seems to warp on every cylinder that I've found, and 3 of the 4 are warped larger in the non-thrust direction, and 1 of them is warped wider in the thrust direction, so it wasn't consistent across all of them. So that's driving me a little bit nuts. I'm hoping what I learned is that the bottoms aren't nearly as important as the top half of this. I can just rehone this, put new rings into my pistons, and then I'm good to go. And I can keep it at stock, and then all of that's good. These things were just super warped on the bottom. So, I mean, I'm seeing well over 10 thousandths difference on the bottoms of these things. So this is what I was running. I never had any running issues, so maybe it's not that big of a deal. I don't know any better. So that's what I'm struggling with. If you know a bunch about these things and you want to give me some advice on what I should do, let me know. I think one thing that I heard that you could do that, well, there's actually 2 things that I'd heard. One, I'd heard that Hayabusa pistons, because they're the same diameter, I've heard they're actually too tight to fit inside of the SV650 cylinders without honing the things out more. So I started to reach out to some people to see if it was possible that maybe I can just put Hayabusa pistons in here. They're like 17 grams lighter. So I don't know if then you run into an issue. You have to have the crank rebalance and stuff, and I prefer not to do that. My wanting to look at a Hayabusa piston is that if it is a little bit tighter, well, maybe you can just hone these things out, hone them true, and then put a Hayabusa piston in, switch out the rings for something that works with just a steel sleeve instead of the Nikasil plated cylinders, and then good to go. And that's like your cheapest route outside of just reboring it. I could get new sleeves pressed into it. Talking to Millennium, I mean, that's going to be pretty stupid expensive for what would ultimately turn out to be a fairly small gain. And so I also don't just want to go buy another set of cylinders from somebody, because it's going to be coming off of a used bike. And I have a feeling I'm going to see every bike that has over 20,000 miles have that same type of warping on the bottoms of these cylinders. Another just interesting thing that I noticed on this is just how thin these skirts are. So they're like 3.5 millimeters. So when you bore these things out, they get even smaller, obviously. So if you're boring a 2 millimeter over, you're taking a millimeter off of each side over on, or take a millimeter off the diameter on this. So all of a sudden you're down from 3.5 millimeters to 2.5 millimeters of skirt on here. And it's just going to warp even more, even quicker. And so if you're chasing outright horsepower, perfection, and performance and stuff like that, and you're going to commit to potentially replacing them every year, go for it. I don't want to replace these things every year. So what I was doing was going and trying to I was just writing down all of the things that you could potentially do while I'm trying to put together a plan for this engine. So before I even do that, I need to be honest with myself on what my goals are for next year. So in 2024, it was my first year in Expert, and it was both good and bad. So I ran about where I was expected to run, which was near the back. I wasn't ever embarrassing. I was able to keep up with people, but I was in the back. And, well, I'll probably remain there for a while. I want to get better at things. So the 2 tracks that I was kind of looking at engaging my performance at are Pit Race, and then primarily Blackhawk Farms, which is my closest track, and we race there 3 times a year. So I got down to a 118.7 at Blackhawk. So legitimately, I think my 2025 goal is to get into the 117s. Now that's going to put you nowhere near the front. There's just really damn good riders. And also there's a lot better bikes now, but there's really damn good riders. I think I could get to 117s next year, maybe, without doing anything to this bike. So I think 117s is a legitimate goal, regardless. And then at Pit, I would like to get under 2 minutes, which I also think I could get there without actually doing any motor work stuff. But that's where I want to get. So this bike here probably had 65 to 68 horsepower. The only performance modifications on it engine-wise, or like horsepower-wise, would be a 525 to 520 conversion on the chain. And then I have a full system M4 exhaust. That's really it. I was Super Sport legal, so I'm not going to care about Super Sport legality coming up to this next year. I've decided I'm just going to say screw Super Sport. I'm there's just so many damn good bikes now that I want to try to get. I think I want to try to get to like 73, 74 horsepower. So if I can get a 650cc bike without breaking the bank, get to 73, 74 horsepower, that would be good for me, and that's what I'm going to try to do. So I'm trying to figure out ways that I can do that realistically. So I'm looking at this, and I just wrote this on an airplane because I was traveling recently, and instead of actually doing work stuff, I just occupy my mind with motorcycle stuff. So just looking at ways that you can increase your compression. You can remove the base gasket, which I saw had been done. I don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do is most likely just order the thinner Spears head gasket, which would put me at the same compression that I was previously. I think it just takes off what is the regular base gasket, or no, sorry, the head gasket that comes with it is like 3 layers of 8/10 thousandths, and I think it's just basically like 2 of them. So it'll put me back to the same thing. I'm not trying to go completely high compression on this, or really that high at all. You could deck the head, which I'm not going to do. And then I was just looking at different pistons. I think the Hayabusa pistons are either lower compression or the same compression. They are a little bit lighter. Only reason I was looking at that was because I just thought it might actually fit better into the cylinder, especially if I have to have them rehoned and retrued. And then not performance really, but cylinder studs, Spears Stells, a kit. Unfortunately, they're out of stock because I'd like to actually buy the cylinder studs, which are just higher quality material that won't, give out after a while. Especially if in the future I try to make it a little bit higher compression, I'd just like to have the better cylinder studs. So then looking at crank and pistons, you can balance and lighten the crank. I think you might actually have to do that if you go to a different set of pistons, which I don't really want to do that. That sounds way more involved than I need to be for something that's ultimately going to be not far off of a stock Gen 2 SV650 regardless. Aftermarket rods, not looking to do that because I'm not going super high compression or high horsepower. High comp or lightened pistons. Maybe I have to get different pistons. Maybe I can't get Suzuki OEMs. If I have to get new pistons, I measured them. I think the service spec is like 2.184 inches, and mine were all over 2.185, so I'm within spec on those things. So the most likely thing, what I want to figure out how to do is just do a hone and rings. Could just have these things honed. I think they're just too out of circle to simply rehone them. But whatever it ends up being, this is the most confusing part to me, the hone, and then I'll just end up putting new rings in likely the existing pistons that I already have. So with valves, you could port and polish things, and I don't think I'm going to go through all the time to do that, though I have a junk head. I'm going to play around with it, but I think I stand to screw more stuff up than gain, and I think the gains would be pretty minimal on that. I'm going to clean my valves outside of the valve seats, outside of the valve faces, and then I'm going to lap the seats on my valves with a spare valve that I have. Now, that's because the valves themselves have that stellite coating on them, and you'll wear through them if you lap them. That's everything that I've read. However, the valve seats, you can actually do it. There's enough material on there. I don't know anything about this, but you could go for I've heard it like described as like a super sport valve seat grind or something like that. I don't know if it's like a 3-angle versus a 5-angle grind. I assume that means you need to get new valves, because I can't imagine you can grind the existing valves because that coating is going to be shot, or maybe you can grind them and then they recoat them with the stellite on them. Something I can do is actually run a tighter valve lash. I didn't think about that until recently, but I set mine extremely loose just for so it gives it less lift when the camshaft starts pushing on that bucket. And I just did that because I figured it would be more reliable that way. Well, I'm not going to be as concerned about reliability on the race engine, so maybe I can run a little bit more aggressive of a valve lash. If like the exhausts were 8 to 12 thousandths, I think I was at like 11 thousandths. So maybe I go to one size down on the shims. And then if you were doing something, if you were going to end up switching like the camshaft to something non-OEM, you'd need stiffer valve springs. So then looking at the cams, this is something I want to do because I'm no longer concerned about being super sport legal, is that I bought from Sergey at Mad8V, I bought a set of Gen 2 intake cams. So I'm going to do that cam swap, so using an OEM, but put the Gen 2 intakes on the intakes of the Gen 1, and then I think you swap over the Gen 1 intakes, and those become your new exhaust, and it just gives a little bit more lift. The Gen 1 SV650 just came with really conservative camshafts, and I think that's actually the thing that makes up the biggest difference between the Gen 1 and Gen 2 horsepower ratings on the motors. I think it came down to camshafts. I don't know a whole lot about degreeing cams. I assume you need adjustable cams to be able to degree them. I've read about people doing that type of thing, advancing timing and stuff like that. I think this is all going to tie together and stuff that I'm not going to be looking at. And then not performance so much, but I see a lot of manual cam chain tensioners, and I actually think, yeah, I had one manual cam chain tensioner sitting on this. There's a blue one right there. Yeah, so I actually don't really like those very much because I don't know how to set them correctly. So I bought some more of the OEM cam chain tensioners from Mad 8V. Now the Flywheel, this one is interesting. So this is something I was looking at actually spending some money on, because if you're gonna try to put a little bit more horsepower into an engine, the Flywheel side's real heavy, and I think if you have issues with your crank, it's on the Flywheel side. So I bought some. So the things that I think you could do is you can get a lightened Flywheel. You can lighten the, not the starter, I think it's the starter sprag or whatever it's called. JB welding the magnets isn't something that was performance. I just seen people do that because if they were losing magnets, or you could go to a total loss system. So why that was interesting to me, I bought some parts. I recently bought another shock from somebody in an exhaust, and it came with a bunch of random parts. And I was looking at it like, wait a minute. This is the one that I had pulled out of my 2021 motor. So this is the stock setup on the SV650, and it's heavy as shit. And I think this Gen 1 is about a pound heavier than the Gen 2. So I got it upside down right now. This is the one I pulled out. There's the 6 magnets inside, 6 bolts. And then on the back, you got the starter clutch thing. And there's just so much material on it. This is a lightened one. I don't know who did this, but I bet if I look at there's different companies that do this, and they have different styles of lightening the starter sprag thing on here. At the very least, I am going to pull this starter sprag thing off, and if I end up using this Flywheel again, I will put this starter thing on here and put it back in the engine. However, this Flywheel has also been lightened, so I think they can take like 200 or 250 grams off the thing, which comes out to quite a bit. The part I'm worried about here is it's got 3 magnets in it. So that diminishes your charging system's capability. However, I've read LWT Racer has an article about it where there are people that run it with, just the diminished charging ability. And each one of these magnets is about 60 grams. So you're taking 180 grams off the thing. And this assembly weighs so little compared to this thing. So like if I throw it on the scale, it comes out to, I don't know exactly what it comes out to, but 1,387 grams. And then if I take this heavy bastard and throw it on there, the scale just starts laughing because it's way too heavy for it. This thing is extremely heavy. The bike has so much, it has a ton of engine braking with it, like too much. And I think a lot of it has to do with this. So going to something lighter like this, it's not going to give you an outright horsepower advantage, but I think it would give you more drivability. You would spin up a whole lot quicker with this. So at the very least, I would switch this on, and it should help with some longevity on the thing because it's going to make that part of the crank lighter. So there's less forces on it, less likely to break. I don't think I'm going to break it with a 74 horsepower motor anyway, but I think that would just be a good idea. So it was kind of a cool find to have there, especially because I think all the Spears stuff is sold out, like half of their website is. On the clutch side, the only two that I wrote down, because it's no straight like performance upgrades, but now that I'm not worried about being super sport legal, I could run a Yoyodyne slipper clutch, which I would quite like to do because I have a problem with skipping that rear tire around quite a bit coming into braking. And then every one of my motors, I put one of these 1999, well, this is a 99 engine, but in the other ones as well, I put one of these 1999 oil pump gears in there. If anything, it probably hurts your performance a bit, but all of those plastic ones that came in all the other motors, those things are all 20 years old now. They actually look just like this water pump one. And at some point, they're going to fail. So I feel like that metal one is a good idea. Carburetor, what I could look at doing, and I probably want to do this sometime in the future, but I'm not going to do it for this year. I would like to go with the 41 millimeter FCR flat slides and put that on the bike. However, doing a bunch of work on a motor for the first time, I don't even want to play with that yet. However, that is probably something I want to go to in the future, and you could get a couple of horsepower from doing that thing. I mean, you just have better airflow coming in. There's less restriction because you got no butterfly in the way. But I don't think I'm going to play with the flat slides yet. And then just a couple other things that I'd looked at was with the transmission, just writing stuff out that I'd heard about. You can undercut and backcut gears or micro polish them. I'm not going to do any of that stuff. All I want to do is split the case on this thing for my first time ever, which I just bought a Tusk case splitter, so that'll be coming apart soon because I know that the transmission, something inside of that thing is broken, so I can't shift it anymore. The bike, I mean, it ran fine, it just doesn't shift. And then the, oh yeah, so like an 04 plus 2004 plus shift star and detent, I may end up ordering one of those, a set of those things from Mad 8V, so there's detents there. This is all Gen 1 stuff. So the 04 plus shift star just has, it's just got bigger stars on it, so you should have more decisive shifts, is my understanding on that. And then the detent, which I think Spears sells one for like $50, but it's literally, I think, identical to the 05 plus SV stock ones. And it just has a little, this has like a ball bearing, like a roller bearing inside of it, as opposed to whatever type of just flat bearing that one is. I'm not too worried about that because I didn't have many shifting issues on that bike. I did on the other engine. So now that I'm no longer going to be worried about being super sport legal, I could modify the intake on this thing. So I'm not stuck having to use the K&N air filter, which is what I had been using. I could just use the OEMs or the high flow filtros and de-snorkel them, which is probably what I'd prefer to do. I think you'd get better airflow and I don't have to deal with the K&N bullshit. I can just replace them when it comes to it. You could run Ram Air in an air box, which obviously I'm not going to set that type of stuff up on this bike. However, I do have a bike behind me that will use that. That'll be a 2026 project. And then tank risers. I still never figured out from the rule book of whether or not those things were legal, but you could run those now. I don't know why I wrote this displacement, but yeah, you could increase horsepower bed, boring your engine out more. So 1 millimeter overbore, I've never really heard anybody do that. 2 millimeter puts you at like what, a SV667, and then a 3 millimeter puts you at like an SV670, or sorry, like 698 or something. SV700 is what you have. Actually, that bike right there, that thing is an SV700 with a stock carburetor inside of it. I don't think I'd want to do the 3 millimeter overbores. It doesn't sound like you have the reliability on it. And then looking at how thin those skirts are, I just got to imagine those things wear out real quick, but who knows. Exhaust, I already have a full M4 system, and then I've switched the drive chain over to 520 on both the bikes. So that's it. That's where I'm at. If I knew what I was doing, or sorry, if I knew what my plan was, I feel like I could knock this out in like a week. I've been staring at this stuff for months now and trying to pull every connection that I have, try to find the few remaining people around me that know a bunch about this stuff, can maybe give me the right advice, some real world experience on it, on what to do. And hopefully I have a plan within a month, and then hopefully I have a bike put together within 3 months so that any outstanding issues I can get figured out before next race season, which right now it's December 22nd. This is the first time I'm really going to need the entirety of the off season because don't know what I'm doing. I'm trying real hard. I'm trying to do a bunch of research, trying to reach out to the right people. But if you have any suggestions on things that I should be doing, and you have experience with these things, and you know why these cylinders warp and whether or not that is an issue, if I'm just trying to get a 73 to 74 horsepower bike, let me know. And then we'll see what 2025 brings. So you watched this far. Thanks for watching.